part. All right. Okay, so again, we will cover some slides today, and so I thank you for your indulgence. I use that word again. It's supposed to be a joke, but that's okay. Nobody gets jokes that I say. Thank you for your indulgence, for looking at home movies. You know how those are. Somebody else's vacation. I will not be here next Sunday. We're traveling to Iowa to see my son Mark and his family, Taylor and Sammy and Lucy. And I can announce this officially. I asked for permission. Number 3 is on the way, due April the 10th. We saw the ultrasound picture already of grandchild number 8. Number 8 coming. So I imagine we'll be out again in the spring for a baptism, God willing. So I won't be with you next Sunday, but then 2 weeks is Reformation Day, the one service together. We'll have Bible class at 9 o'clock, and then our service at 10:15, and then a nice potluck luncheon afterwards, as we did last year. It was wonderful. So this is kind of leading up to Reformation. I'm not sure how far I'll get through these slides. I hope to get through many, but maybe I might continue them a week or two. I don't know, but we'll see how that goes. So we're still in the Alps, and we spent a good part of 3+ days in the Alps just to get started, just to see southern part of Germany and kind of the more vacation-y type things to do. But then right after this, we start to head northward into Luther country, where we head right up to Eisenach, where Luther, as a young teenager, studied there for 4 years. Johann Sebastian Bach was born there, and we went into the Bach house, and all of the monuments and tributes to J.S. Bach was truly wonderful. And then from there, we went to Worms. You've heard of the Diet of Worms. We learned to pronounce things differently. Worms is the word for that, where Luther defended his faith. And I'd like to spend more time with that today if I can. And then after that, on to the Wartburg Castle, where he went for 10 months in exile to escape not only persecution, but to escape the threat of death for his life. So that's where we are. So we begin, we go back in time. We're still in the Alps, and so we visit a place called Garmisch-Partenkirchen. It's hyphenated. It used to be 2 separate towns divided by a river. It was Adolf Hitler who, at the time of the Olympics, put the name together for which it ever stands. Garmisch and Partenkirchen is now the town that is forever known since Hitler's decree. And 1936 Olympics, the Winter Olympics. And so we stopped, and there you can see is the ski jump, a part of the ski jump where they were. And there was only 17 nations represented at that time. Norway won the most medals. How do I know these things? I don't know. I'm a nerd. And so 17, there's only 80 female athletes in total at that time. And the U.S. won 4 medals, and Canada won 1 medal, a silver medal in hockey. They were the gold medalists defending their honor and right to be champions, and at the last minute, Great Britain scored a goal and beat the Canadians. And we received 1 silver medal in 1936. And this is the last time that the Olympics were held in the same country in the same year. Because later that summer, where was it? In Berlin, Germany, and the famous story of Jesse Owens defeating the fastest Germans that displeased Hitler much. So this is where we're at, a little bit of history here, and some of the gates, the original gates the statues to human endeavor, humanism, right? They make men and women look like gods, and that's basically what it is. We're worshiping back to the Greek god era of the worship of man's abilities. So a beautiful area, of course, and here you see some of the original seating. And, whoop, did I miss it? I probably did. So we were told as the seating, the stadium goes around this way, right about here was where Adolf Hitler sat during the games, right there. It's not marked, you can imagine, they don't mark those things for good reasons, right? They would be desecrated if anybody knew Hitler was here. You know, you see signs in America, you know, George Washington slept here. Well, I don't think anybody would desecrate it, but if you saw signs, Hitler was here, you know, that would not be good. So he sat right about over here at that time. So I have more pictures, but I won't show them. But then we go into the town of Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and particularly into the town of Partenkirchen. They're very distinct. Here's this wonderful restaurant. It's a world-famous restaurant that we ate later that night. And there's Joanne over there. And, you know, if you want to go to a traditional German meal, and what do they have in there? They have the accordion guy that sits right close to you, playing all the traditional German music. And they also have the what? The guys in the lederhosen swatting flies. You know, mosquitoes. It's mosquito season, and I think that's where that came from. That's why they wear the heavy leather, so that they don't hurt themselves. So we're wandering these towns. We come to the K, one of the K's shops for cheese, and the lady who served us did not know a speck of English, so Joanne did her best to order the proper amount of cheese, and we got double the amount we wanted. And so we would eat it on the bus. And then we're walking down the street, and we come back. One of the most marvelous inventions I've ever seen, and I wish they did more of this here in the United States. I had to take a picture of it. This is called a Manor Parkplatz. This is where the men sit while the ladies go shopping. And I thought, wow, this is what we need, man. Except at Home Depot, it's the opposite. But everything else, honey, I'm going to Michael's. I'm going to the yarn shop. Okay. Where can I sit? Is there a football game on somewhere? So look, they're way ahead of the time. They're way ahead of the time. So walking around, now I took a picture of this, is that they had all these inventive ways of storing their wood, and most houses stored their wood outside, of course. This is how they heated their homes. It was wood stoves in Germany. You know, we're so spoiled with our electricity and gas and oil. No, their fuel is wood. Their fuel is wood, and this is how they store their wood for the winter. And where we stayed back in Fulda, they had a large storage of wood as well. So I just, that was one, it was kind of impressive. I'm sure they might have another wood pile somewhere, but that became more decorative that way. Yeah. How'd that get fuzzy? Let's see, that's probably why. Let's see if this works. Pastor Zimmerman showed me how to upload. Guess whose birthday it was? Yeah, that was my birthday. Yeah. Und apparently these two young men have been doing this since the age of 7. So here they are as grown men in their regalia here. All right.
socks just looks like lake waters there.
Joanne's at the White Sausage. President Harrison had to get his pig knuckles. And so that's a famous dish in Germany, is pig knuckles. There's a German word for it. Joanne, do you know the German word for the pig knuckles? Anyway, so I eventually got that myself. Another picture of our tour guide. He put on his lederhosen and got his picture taken with the two young men who were dancing. And of course, our home base was over Ammergau, so we're back at our home base. And that morning was beautiful with the cloudy mist that was coming up. And we spent 2 Sundays, one in Oberammergau and the other in Wittenberg. And this might surprise you, but everything is closed on Sunday in Germany. It used to be that way. We used to remember those days, but stores are closed. Probably only gas stations perhaps are open. But and it's interesting to me that not many people go to church in Germany, but there's nothing to do on Sunday but to rest or whatever. Remember those days when everything was closed on Sunday? Remember those days? Well, that's Germany. Kind of surprising. So we walked around a lot and just saw a lot of closed window shops that day and enjoyed our time. Again, there's Joanne in I think we had the nicest room, the nice location. So there she is. Alta Post. Look it up. It's very nice. So that Sunday we found a smaller church that they allowed us to worship in that Sunday. And there's our tour. President Harrison and Pastor Michael Fries with the liturgist, Pastor Kirkaba. He was the preacher that Sunday. And I don't know if you recognize anybody else per se. It was neat that Pastor Fries's father and mother came, and also his son Gabriel came. So imagine that experience for a 16-year-old or 15-year-old Gabriel. So it was nice to have him along the way. So that's our tour group, young and old, from all parts of the country, California, Michigan, anywhere you want to mention. So part of the fun is to get to know these fellow Lutherans from all over the world, and get to know them and make those connections. And anyway, so that was our first Sunday of worship. We found we were allowed, I think it was it a Roman Catholic? It was a Lutheran. Yeah, okay, that's right. Okay, this suited us well. So, back on the bus, and now we make our way up to Heidelberg. Heidelberg, let me say a few things about it. What you see there is the palace, or the castle, sometimes it's called. It's perched on the highest peak or view in the town of Heidelberg. It's 160,000 people. It's a huge, large university town. And a quarter of the population are students, if you can imagine that. Out of 160,000, a quarter are students. Huge. And it's Germany's oldest university, founded in 1386. And as I did a bit of research, it's the warmest region in Germany. You'll find almond and fig trees, palm trees, olive trees in this area. The beautiful Neckar River. It'll flow into the Rhine River. And but here is the Heidelberg Castle. And I wish I could have show you more pictures on the inside. Of course, we go up and we go into this castle. Built in 1214. What you see there are the ruins. It is said that it is the most important Renaissance structure north of the Alps. It has been demolished over the centuries by fires and by wars. And so what you see there is mostly around the reconstruction begun in the 18th century. So we're talking old. Group Ruprecht, king of Germany, in 1401 built this palace. That is, he made it a lot larger, simply to impress his guests. 15th century, 1401, King Ruprecht of Germany. So here's wandering some down the streets. There's two places I would have loved to spend more time in. One was Heidelberg, another was Leipzig. But they were kind of stopover as we were heading up to other places. And this is the view from the palace or the castle up above. This is inside the central area, the courtyard area. Lots of statues that depict kings and important people that served there in the region. Statues, they love their statues. I think this was King Ruprecht, the guy who started building the castle. And then you come, as you go downstairs and you go into the wine cellar regions, you find the world's largest wine barrel. Here it is. Made from 130 oak trees. It can hold 59,000 gallons of wine. I mean, you can see it. See the people there, right? And then there was a restaurant. I took the picture of the restaurant. It's fresh fruit salad with lots of grapes. Actually, only grapes. Fermented grapes. Maybe it's wine. Okay, it's wine. Well, the tour guide said that lots of people at that time had serious alcohol problems. You can tell. I mean, you got a 59,000 gallon wine barrel. What are you going to do? You know. So 130 oak trees to construct this thing, and it was built in 1751. And then you can climb stairs and go on top of it. They put a dance floor on top of the wine barrel. To do your dancing. Okay. Here is the Neckar River. It's a beautiful day. And a Catholic statue to Mary. So I took that picture with the castle behind it as we got down. All right. I don't think I have this, but right next to the bridge that crosses the Neckar River, which over time, over the centuries, it was one of the main bridges that connected both sides of the town. Destroyed in many ways, fires, floods, even the Nazis blew it up to prevent Allied troops from crossing, so this bridge took a lot of things, but I thought I would include this, maybe I didn't. Yes, I did, it's coming up. Okay, I'll leave that. Now you can't, I have a better picture, but for now, this is the place. The Augustinian monastery, or the area where Luther defended his 95 Theses in the Heidelberg Disputation. The Heidelberg Disputation. So he posted the 95 Theses in 1517, it was the next year, where he was made to go to this Augustinian hall where he would defend his 95 Theses. He would defend the doctrine of human depravity and the bondage of the will. And this is where we get and coin the term, the theology of the cross. So whenever we talk about the theology of the cross as opposed to the theology of glory, more so Reformed type theology, this is where it came from. So this, I wouldn't say it's a manhole cover, but it points to the spot where this disputation happened in Heidelberg when Luther was still a young monk. Now becoming more and more famous all over Europe for posting his theses, which via the printing press started to spread like wildfire. So you stand there and you kind of think about it, and you hear what the guides say and what various pastors say about it. President Harrison always would have a wonderful lecture at these important So it was at the Heidelberg Disputation where one of his main enemies arose and continued to oppose Luther for the rest of his life. His name was Johann Eck, E-C-K, and this Johann Eck later challenged Luther at the Leipzig debate several years later. But he would not leave Luther alone. He just hated Luther. Many people hated Luther. Of course, when you tell people the truth, they don't like it. You don't want to be told you're wrong. None of us. Especially the Pope. Right? So that was the spot of the Heidelberg Disputation. We go into one of the churches. Here's a little Lego, is it Lego statue? Playmobil. Playmobil, a little Playmobil of Luther. We had a few of those through our tour. The beautiful church and the beautiful nave at one of the churches in Heidelberg. Here's this famous bridge. And then here's this famous monkey right by the bridge. This monkey, not that exact one, that one was reconstructed in the early 70s, but there was always a monkey by the bridge. As you cross the bridge, you're always supposed to remember where you've come from and where you're going, and you never forget where you've come from and give thanks. So that's why the monkey is holding a mirror. So as you cross the bridge, you would think about the past, where you've come from. Don't forget your past to give thanks for that. But it became a good luck charm. So people would stand under it, they would rub the mirror for good luck, they would rub his nose for good luck, for prosperity and other things. You see his knuckles. If you rubbed his knuckles, it was a particular wish or luck that you could receive. I just did it for fun. I don't believe in that stuff. And then right next to it, on to the left, if you see it, see the little mice? Okay. If you rub the mice, God would give you children. So I did. And Joanne laughed. You know? They give you more children. I prayed for grandchildren. I rubbed it, I prayed for more grandchildren.
And it worked.
Oh yeah. Okay, so then we travel to Worms. There are famous paintings. There's actually, I didn't realize this, but this is probably the most famous of them all, where Luther is standing before Emperor Charles V and all the nobles and knights and other important people defending his faith. And I'll show you some more pictures of how this is depicted. This is depicted in dozens and dozens and dozens of different ways, this scene. Okay. Here's one of them, a fresco. But I'll indulge you a little bit. This is important. Probably the best book on the Reformation and the life of Luther is this one by Eric Metaxas, who's not a Lutheran. But this is what I read when I was on the bus or on the airplane and just had time to read a few pages. And this is the most engaging book I've ever read on Luther. And you can tell that he did his research and he was trying to be ever so objective about many things. So a man who rediscovered God and who changed the world. And so, if I can indulge you again, this is important for me just to read and go through. I'll show you some of the other images before I do. Of this most momentous time in history. In fact, many would agree that this one event changed the whole direction of the entire world. A lowly monk who stood up to the tyranny of the Holy Roman Empire. People who stand up to tyranny. And we still need to do this today, even our own country. Bold voices to stand up to those who rule over us and make our lives miserable because of power and wealth. So other type scenes. There's even one cartoon. And so here's just a sampling of all of them. There was more of these that I didn't take all pictures of, but here's just a sampling of all these scenes depicted. And so the building is no longer there, but here's the courtyard. Here's the courtyard at Worms, and the building is gone, but they tried to mark the exact space where Luther stood, somewhere in the middle of this courtyard. And they marked it by these shoes. So what do? What do you stand in? and I should have I wasn't thinking I should have done the famous pose. It looks like President Harrison behind me is doing that. Look at him. Apparently he was giving a lecture at that time. And so let me read this here. Wearing his simple Augustinian cassock, Luther was escorted past the emperor's Spanish troops and on into the chamber where there was assembled such a host of dignitaries as would take anyone's breath away. Some of the most powerful people in the world were there. The 7 electors themselves were there, plus innumerable archbishops and princes and dukes and other nobles, all decked out in their sumptuous and bejeweled best, replete with gaudy golden chains and befeathered hats, and all of them stood agape at the curious spectacle of this humble monk walking into their midst, who in turn goggled back at them, doubtless staggered by the sheer breadth and wealth of dignitaries here assembled. Luther was obviously not used to this sort of environment, and just as he entered, he saw Conrad Peutinger, the Augsburg dignitary whom he knew, unaware that it was considered rude in the emperor's presence to behave in any other way than with extreme gravity. Luther cheerfully greeted his friend. At this point, the Marshal Pappenheim rebuked Luther. He was not to speak unless bidden to do so. It would also be said that this would have been the first time that Luther and Frederick the Wise, the Elector, who defended and supported Luther, had ever laid eyes on each other. They would again see each other in the chamber the following day, and then never again. They communicated only through letters and never spoke. One of the delegates in the room remembered the scene. Quote, a man was let in who they said was Martin Luther, about 40 years old, somewhat more or less, robust in physique and face, with not especially good eyes, and lively features which he frivolously changed. By the way, Luther was no taller than about 5'4". Some say 5'2". This is how tall he was, which was average in those days. Right. In a letter to the Pope's Vice Chancellor, the prickly nuncio tissed about Luther's outrageous demeanor. The fool entered with a smile on his face and kept moving his head back and forth, up and down, in the presence of the emperor. And there at the focal point of the grand elegance sat the fabled young emperor himself, duly elevated upon his dais. What did the elegant grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain make of this crude and pertinent monk? Portraits of Charles from this time give the unmistakable impression of a perfect twit, a cruel victim of spoiling and aristocratic inbreeding. But Charles V was very far from that. What must it have felt like for Luther to come into the presence of such worldly power? That he smiled seemed evidence of equanimity born of his deep faith. When he came into the designated spot in the room, right, where he was to stand, he beheld a table piled high with his own books, some 40 in all. They were the Basel editions of his works, especially bound for the occasion. The man now charged with being Luther's interlocutor as the emperor's spokesman, Johannes von der Ecken, who is not to be confused with Johannes Eck. This Johannes von der Ecken was the secretary to the Archbishop of Trier, who was one of the 7 electors. And von der Ecken had himself been one of the people to oversee all of the burning of Luther's books in his own city. Because some in the room understood Latin, While others understood German, everything must be spoken in both languages. Most to the point, Emperor Charles himself spoke German rather poorly, so it might have been mostly for his benefit that everything also was spoken in Latin. So, von der Ecken now addressed Luther, first in Latin and then in German, saying that the emperor had summoned him here to answer but two questions. The first was whether all of these books bearing his name had indeed been written by him. The second was whether he would wish to recant anything from them. That was all, and that would be all. Luther's appointed legal counsel at Worms was a man by the name of Schurf, a professor of law from Wittenberg, who had already been at Worms since February at the behest of Frederick. But Schurf now leapt up and demanded that the book's titles be read aloud. Thus von der Ecken now read from the long list to the assembly. The sheer number of books and the titles themselves must have rung through the chamber in the minds of all who listened. They went on and on and on, and these were the writings that had caused a great revolution, that had been printed and that had been disseminated throughout most of the known world and translated into many languages, and that had been read and discussed and read and discussed. One by one, the names of these works were announced. The long list of volumes itself spoke volumes, how the world had already changed as a result of them. When at last the titles were ended, Luther spoke, first in German and then translating what he had said in Latin. One observer remarked, he spoke with subdued, soft voice, as if frightened and shocked, with little calm in his visage, and gestures also with little deference in his attitude and countenance. It seems that many listening that day found it quite difficult to understand him. But what he in fact said was now that the books, yes, are all mine, I have written more. Then von der Ecken asked the second question, did Luther defend them or wish to recant them? Included in the long list near the end was Luther's recently published volumes of lectures on the Psalms. Aleander had ordered it from the Frankfurt Book Fair and added it to the list of books. This recent book, like many others on the long list, was not the source of any of the troubling statements cited in the papal bull. Von der Ecken had made it very clear that they wanted only simple yes or no answers. They would not be drawn into a debate. So Luther said, this touches God in his word. This affects the salvation of souls. Of this Christ said, he who denies me before men, him I will deny before my Father. To say too little or too much would be dangerous. I beg you, give me time to think it over. He said that he wanted to answer satisfactorily and in a way that did no violence to the divine word and danger to my own soul. To be sure, this was not the response anyone expected. It was irregular and confusing. And indeed, what was it exactly? Was it merely Saxon cunning, a buffoonish stunt to buy time and enable the crafty Luther to do something that would throw sand in the faces of these august men here arrayed? Or was it a sign that Luther was frightened and like a rabbit must scamper back to his warren to cower, for he knew not what else to do? But the simple answer to this conundrum, which scholars have debated for 5 centuries, is likely that Luther was fully expecting to be confronted with his own purportedly heretical statements and assertions, which he would be given a chance to reiterate or deny. That and nothing more. He never expected to be confronted with an impossibly jumbled pile of as many works and to be asked from his mind to make a definitive statement upon all of them. He had certainly prepared none. If people thought that fear of a painful death at stake would have prodded Luther simply to say, yes, they are mine, and yes, I recant everything you wish me to recant, they were mistaken. Luther's odd and unexpected request for more time must have answered. So von der Ecken conferred with the Diet and the Emperor, then he returned to speak, but before he gave the court's yea or nay, he must first express his prickly dismay and astonishment that a theological professor should be unable to so quickly give the simple answer for which he had come to this Diet. Such things were hardly to be endured. And then he said, and therefore you do not deserve to be granted a longer time for consideration, yet out of innate clemency and his imperial majesty grants 1 day for your deliberation, so that you may furnish an answer openly tomorrow at this hour, on this condition, that you do not present your opinion in writing, but declare it by word of mouth. So Luther was led away, and I'll skip over this part, but afterwards he received much counsel from many friends who were with him, as it describes, and then the next day comes, and by that time Luther at last was summoned before the emperor, and now it was dark. So a lot of the pictures you see actually is dark with candlelights. That's the way we should be looking at it. All lit by torches, whose flickering lent an undeniable drama to what has since been acknowledged to be one of the most seminal meetings in all of human history. Von der Ecken began by once more dressing down the reprobate before him, reminding Luther that he had no right to the extra time he had been given, inasmuch as he knew very well why he had been summoned, and also because he was a theologian who was expected to be able to answer in matters of faith. Aleander so approved of this masterful and somewhat sarcastic belittling of Luther that he later recommended von der Ecken to be rewarded a papal promotion. So after putting Luther in his place, von der Ecken at last asked the previous day's second question a second time. Did Luther stand by all of these many books, or was there something in them he wished to retract? So on this day, Luther was prepared, and his voice was neither quiet nor meek as on the previous day. Though he spoke with respect and humility, he spoke with courage and boldness too. No one would complain that they couldn't understand what he was saying. Luther began, "Most serene emperor, most illustrious princes, most clement lords." He then humbly asked that everyone forgive his inexperience in knowing the correct titles for everyone, and for perhaps using the wrong gestures than what was appropriate. Doubtless some, perhaps it was Poitinger, had informed him of his faux pas from the previous day. "I beseech you," Luther said, "to kindly pardon me as a man accustomed not to courts, but to the cells of monks." What followed was a speech of between 10 and 15 minutes that he delivered smoothly and forcefully and calmly, according to all witnesses, first in German and then in Latin. He began by saying that to answer the question whether he would retract anything from these books, he must first point out that the books themselves fall into three categories. First, there were those works in which he dealt with the Christian faith in a very straightforward manner, in which even his critics acknowledged were good and useful and instructive. Even the papal bull itself said that so roundly and harshly condemned him had admitted this. It was rather clever of Luther to begin by establishing that he was not merely some troublemaker, but that everyone had agreed he had written many approved and instructive things. And then he said there was a second category of books that inveighs against the desolation of the Christian world by the evil lives and teaching of the papists. Who can deny this when the universal complaints testify that by the laws of the popes the consciences of men are racked? At this the emperor himself interrupted and shouted out, "No!" But Luther went on, playing to the audience of German nobles, most of whom passionately agreed that Rome had abused them in all manner of ways. He said, "Property and possessions, especially in this illustrious nation of Germany, have been devoured by the unbelievable tyranny." Even his enemy, Duke George, would have agreed on this score. Luther went on, "Shall I recant at this point? I would open the door to more tyranny and impiety, and it will be all the worse, would it appear, that had done so at the insistence of the Holy Roman Empire." And then he goes on to say about the third category. He said, "It contains attacks on private individuals. I confess that I have been more caustic than comports with my profession, but I am being judged not on my life, but for the teaching of Christ. And I cannot renounce these works either without increasing tyranny and impiety." Luther here invokes tyranny. This was the nationalistic mood of Germany at this time against Rome. So he actually had lots of support. So I'll skip over a few things. Von der Ecken responds to him in a rather abrupt and rude way against him. I just want to get to what he said. Here's his famous words. Luther answers, "Since your serene majesties and your lordships seek a simple answer, I will give it in this manner, plain and unvarnished, unless I am convinced by the testimony of Scripture and clear reason, for I do not trust in the Pope or in the councils alone, Since it is well known that they often err and contradict themselves, I am bound to the Scriptures. I have quoted, and my conscience is captive to the Word of God. I cannot and will not retract anything, since it is neither safe nor right to go against conscience. I cannot do otherwise. Here I stand. God help me. Amen. In fact, we don't know whether the most famous of those words, "Here I stand, I can do no other," were actually spoken by Luther, although there's no reason to believe they were not. Those who recorded his words in the room that day did not write them, but they were put in the first printed versions of the speech, either as a correction from the transcribed version or as an incorrect addition. All of this Luther said in German. He was then expected to asked to say all he had said in Latin. But a Saxon counselor called out, "If you cannot do it, doctor, you've done enough." Everyone at this time was hot and tired. It was said that Luther was sweating profusely. The crush of so many bodies for so many hours must have made it warm, and doubtless there was not sufficient oxygen in the room. Nonetheless, Luther insisted on continuing, and now said everything once more, this time in Latin. It is recorded that Frederick the Wise was particularly charmed by the Latin rendition. Where Luther stood, he said those words, is today memorialized in the simplest of stone plaques and of boots that are placed and cemented on the concrete. There are no hints that one's feet is where the history of the world is widely reckoned to have pivoted. Long gone is the great palace of the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Here and there are consciences, here or there, but okay, let me skip that. History invariably records Luther's final words of speech, "Here I stand, I can do no other," as the culmination and therefore the end of the scene. But the reality is that it did not end so cinematically. The crowd of princes conferred with each other on what had just transpired, and there was doubtless much peripheral gabbling. Then Luther was told that his remarks had not answered the question sufficiently. Von der Ecken said that Luther must simply put aside his conscience, something that shocks the modern ear, principally because we now live in the world that came into being as a result of Luther's stand that day, a world in which one's conscience is considered sacred. Others in the room held that Luther's details were mistaken, that no councils had actually ever heard, but Luther retorted that he would be happy to give them chapter and verse. Yet because the hour was late and because they did not want to give Luther a further opportunity to do damage by answering, as he surely would have, the session was brought to an end. And then it goes on to say that Luther was escorted out. Nobody, especially Luther himself, not knowing what would happen to him. But later it was Frederick the Wise who spoke to his friend Spalatin, that he said that we must provide now safe passage for Luther, because now he would be declared a heretic in the Holy Roman Empire, and now his life was at stake. As we toured Worms, we come to one of the Luther Platzes, this huge statue not far from where he defended his faith, just within a few hundred yards. Interesting, all of the main reformers of Europe are there, along with Melanchthon and some others, but Luther stands tall in the middle, the Lutherplatz. All right. Maybe we should stop there. I read from Metaxas because he writes in a prose that I've never read before. He makes it so real and dramatic. I appreciate his writing style that way. Anyway, questions or comments? Our time is almost up. What we do now is we travel from Worms and we go to Rudesheim on Rhine. So we take a two-hour cruise on the Rhine. So I'll show you in 2 weeks. We'll just start that briefly. I'll show you all of the ancient castles we saw on both sides of the Rhine, Rudesheim on Rhine, the Rhine River. Beautiful day, anyway. And then we get to the Wort, where Luther finally was exiled and spent 10 months there. Doing what? Well, we'll have to discover what he did for 10 months at that Wartburg Castle. Okay, anybody else? Questions, comments?
Pastor,
Yeah.
were those statues there through World War II or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
and survived.
Yep, they survived. I mean, I wish I could identify some of them here. Wycliffe is there. Melanchthon is there. A lot of the Lutheran reformers are all the way behind it. They extend outward too. And John Hus is there. John Hus I'll bring up again and talk about him, because Luther was thinking about this reformer from 1415 in what we call now the city of Czechoslovakia or Slovakia. He did exactly most of what Luther did 100 years before him, and he was burned at the stake. And Hus, his name means goose. So as he's burning at the stake, I think I talked about him in our martyr session. We talked about Christian martyrs, remember? He said, yeah, now you're cooking the goose. But one who will come after me will be the swan. Not knowing that he referred to Luther. So Luther is also nicknamed the Swan, and if you ever see swans by Luther memorials or Luther places, it's because of what Jan Hus said 100 years earlier, that the swan would follow me, and here he came. Yeah.
It's something kind of interesting. The monkey on the bridge.
Yeah.
So the people of the time had issues with bishops of men. It's the town right next to them.
Right.
So the monkeys are all faced with their rear ends towards fans to kind of tell them what they do.
We were never instructed to rub that part of the monkey.
But as a kid, I always thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. So anyway, good. Anybody else? And, all right, we'll get to it again in 2 weeks and have a little cruise down the Rhine River for a while. Then we'll get to the Wartburg and keep going beyond there. There's still lots of places. But I mean, there I stood. I mean, here I stand. There I stood where the Heidelberg Disputation took place, and there I stood where Luther defended the faith before the world in the city of Worms at the Diet there. In those two places, two very important historical places. And so I guess we're leading up to Reformation here in a couple of weeks, Reformation month. Right. So good. All right, let's pray. The prayer for taking faith home. The prayer of the week. Dear wise and compassionate God, may we see in Jesus the way of life that trusts your goodness and serves others with compassion and generosity. As we pray in Jesus' name.